Yeah, actually, in my discussion with Dr. K, I said back in the U.S., I would just simply record my lectures from home when I couldn't make it on those days, when I felt better later in the day. But unfortunately, this consensus is that if I did that, people wouldn't watch the lectures, that's there. And examining the YouTube statistics, and I don't see who watches the lectures on YouTube, but I can see when, how many views there are. And typically when I record a lecture, nobody watches them until right before the final exam. Then all of a sudden people start going back and reviewing some of the lectures that's there. So, all right. While I'm talking about exams, it's time to schedule a midterm exam right there. And I was planning on having it on Monday of next week, but since I slept through this Monday, I'm going to make it next Thursday, okay? So let me just write this down. I'll put a note. Actually, let me not write it down. Let me just put it straight on Facebook. That way, right there, and Facebook. I've got two. I got tired of logging out, so some of you are seeing my post of me coming from my alter ego, which is normally my personal page, which I never post anything on. That's there. So, but my sister's been using it a lot. So, robotics midterm exam, and we said 22nd March, right? And I'm going to just say normal room, but we may have to spread out over another room, because if I look at the attendance slip, which this is on the official record, but since I've already resigned, they can't fire me, right? So I can admit to not taking attendance on the formal record that they're. We'll make that bright red to where select audience and robotics right there, post it there. According to the official record, there's supposed to be, all right, you shouldn't miss that on the Facebook page, right? The official record, there's supposed to be 44 students in this class. And I look around this room and I see about 17, maybe 16, something like that, which tells me that there's less than a 50% attendance right there. And I'm going to rely on the people in this room, along with this Facebook posting, to let the rest of the class know to show up next Thursday, right there. So, all right, now I'm going to go over what the midterm exam is going to look like. I'm not going to post this, so your buddies probably will want to watch this particular video right there, because I'm going to put the questions up there. And again, I'm not going to post them, but you can see them and you can write them down and that there. And the questions may not be exactly like these, but they're going to be pretty darn close right there. And I've only got 3 questions. And what these 3 questions are right there. And this is an example. This is actually 3 questions from last year's midterm, or the 2 years ago midterm that's there. So I'm going to ask the first 3 questions from the midterm, and I may simply take some of it off, because midterm you get what, two hours, and you're going to have, well, you can take as much as 2 hours for this exam too, I guess so. But that there. So I'm not going to cover anything, but question 3 deals with sensors, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute right there. That's it. We're already taking pictures of it. That there. Here, do you need to make it larger where you can see it? Because that there. There's question 1. You can get that picture. Question 2. You can get that picture. And question 3. You can get that picture right there. So there's 3 questions right there. So, and of course, you're broken in various parts right there. So, right there. But all these questions are basically coming back to just regurgitating or telling me what I've covered, and they're covered in the slides, or you can find it through internet searches. So there's no textbook to refer to or pages in a textbook. Now that's always the first question of every student. This course is kind of one of the course that I said that nobody, you know, they specified a curriculum and a textbook for it. I took one look at the textbook and said, there's no way we're doing four-dimensional differential equations in matrix forms that there, yeah, which is, and I'm serious, that's what the textbook had in the second chapter was, you know, 4x4 matrices, you know, in a differential equation. Now, you've taken differential equations, or you will by the time you graduate. You should have had some different equations. You haven't had, and you've had matrices. You probably have never had matrix state differential equations that there, and nobody does it in the real world anyway. So that there. So these are the kind of questions that I'm going to be asking. And the first one, this is 9 marks. That should actually be 8 marks. That there, what? Yeah, that adds up. That there. I don't know how I would rate it with 9 marks. But first thing is mention, and the word is, we use mention because of there's this thing called Bloom's taxonomy. I don't know what it is. It's a teaching philosophy that was developed in the 1950s. We threw it away in the 1970s in the U.S. before I started teaching, so I never used it. But they require certain wordings that there. But mention and explain the various types of motors that are used in robotics. So I've got 4 of these that there. I've covered those pretty much, and they're covered in the slides. You know, you should know what a servo motor is. You should know what a stepper motor is. I didn't go through that in great detail, but it's in the slides. I may take that one out. I really didn't spend a lot of time talking about it, but stepper motors are used a fair amount. But a standard DC motor right there, and a continuous servo. You know, so I list 4 of the various types of motors right there. Now, I may come back, and I also may mention the various types of power systems, drives, in which case you would have to mention pneumatics, hydraulic, and electrical motors, DC motors. So this particular exam, I didn't ask that, but again, it's that's the either or question. I may talk about, and I may have a question that says, oh, somebody's phone's doing its thing up there. I may give the 3 types of motor or power systems that they're in. I'm just going to. Our 3 types of power systems are pneumatic, which is air, hydraulic, which is oil of some type, right there, and electrical, which is usually a DC motor of some type, right there. So I may say, these are the 3 types, give the advantages of each of the 3 types and where you would use one versus the other. Give me an example of a pneumatic robotic application, right there. Explain to me that there, it doesn't, and the way I may word the question, it may not have to be a robotic system. Like for example, hydraulic, you could mention for the power steering pump or system in your car, power assist, that's an hydraulic system right there. That there, the lift in a garage is a hydraulic system. That there, the presses that there. You won't find too many hydraulic systems in robots unless you're talking very large robots, right there. Pneumatics, you're usually talking very small robots, right there. And the electrical is actually probably 80 to 90% of most robotics are run on electrical motors of some type, right there. So But but that's not in the midterm exam that I did 3 years ago or 2 years ago or not. It wasn't 3 years ago. I wasn't here 3 years ago. I've been here over 2.5. But last year or last semester, I just asked about the motors. So I may ask about motors on the midterm and ask about power systems on the final exam. They may not be the same. But part B of the first one is mention the various types of mechanical joints right there. So I went through that list in the slides of where I went through the various types of joints. I can't remember off the top of my head, but that's all right. I'm not taking the exam. I mean, I didn't study for it. It's been a while. That's there. And like I said, I got about 3 hours sleep last night. So, and again, then I also had kind of a part B, 1 and 2 here. And what is the difference between a rotational and a revolving joint? Right there. Now, the rotational and the revolving joints are actually covered in the first part where I said the various types, but in particular, I wanted to know the difference between a revolving and a rotational joint right there. And then part C is an essay question. Everyone hates those, I know, in this room, where you need to write sentences in English in a coherent form that I can understand. I will not be grading grammar, nor will I be grading spelling, but I at least need to understand that you know what that's there. And this may not be the question. This is an example. But discuss the issues that must be dealt with before self-driving cars can be permitted. That there. Also, in your discussion, analyze the effect, economic and social, of replacing taxi drivers with self-driving cars. Now, that is a hypothetical question, but that's a real question because Uber has put a lot of money into the development of self-driving cars. California has passed a law recently, and I'm saying within the last 2 or 3 weeks, that allows self-driving cars on the road without a driver. Now they've been doing experimental runs, but all these self-driving cars that they've been testing have always had a driver in case something went wrong. Now they're saying, no, we don't need the driver anymore because you've proven the technology. Self-driving cars are going to be in the developed world probably before most of you get married and have your first child. We're talking the next 2 or 3 years out there. So you're going to see, Germany, Holland, France, U.S., Canada, Australia. These countries are all going to be having self-driving cars, or we'll get rid of the drivers. Malaysia will probably be in the 2nd or 3rd round. That's there. But before you can have self-driving cars, what has to change? That's there. One of the things you may have to look at is the condition of the roads. And I'm not telling you what the answers are. I'm not even telling you the questions. But it's going to be an essay question of this. It may be a question of, you're a plant, you're the plant manager, and your company is discussing replacing the assembly line with a fully automated system, using robotics, which will save so many millions of ringgits per year. However, it will replace so many workers. Discuss what the effects are going to be of that. You're laying workers off. What does that do to the local economy? What does that do to the profitability of your company? That's there. And you may even discuss the fact that if you don't do the automation, your company may not exist in 3 years, 5 years. That's been an issue in the U.S. with, especially in the car industry, that General Motors and Ford have both been in the situation where they're looking at a plant and they're saying, all right, this plant is 75 years old. And there are automobile plants that are 75 years old. We had one of those in Fort Wayne, Indiana, where I used to live, that made trucks for International Harvester. You know, they made the old Scouts there. You know, a Scout, they don't make them anymore, is a lot like a Land Rover. Right, there's a big SUV, but it's not like, what's the one that's so popular, the Honda CRV, that there. But that there, and the question came in is, you know, if this plant is old, we either have to automate it and put in, you know, robots and assembly lines, or we have to close the plant. And ultimately, the decision was made to close the plant and move it and build a new plant elsewhere. So, which meant that about 4,000 people were put out of work. You know, in a city of about 150,000 people, you know, you're looking at, you know, a high-paid production line job will support about 3 other jobs right there. So when you look at economics, that there, when you look at factory jobs, that there, you know, these are jobs that actually make something, something that produces a product. You know, my job here, I'm not making anything. You know, my product is you when you go out and get a job. But I can't actually point to a car and say that I produced this car. And therefore, I have value to the market because of the fact that I produce 50 cars or in a year or whatever. I don't have that there. So, you know, now you can say that I have value because I teach so many courses and the tuition rates is so much, and you can try to put a value on what I'm doing that there. But teaching is a non-direct production type thing. You can't point towards it. So when you look at a factory job, if you lose one factory job, you're going to lose 3 to 5 other non-production jobs. And those include policemen, teachers, you know, people that work at supermarkets and stores, all these. So when you look at losses of jobs in the hard sector, when I say the hard sector, that produces, you know, in Malaysia, you've got factories that produce electrical components, ICs, you've got plants that produce cars, you've got plants that they're. So without those, you wouldn't have an economy out there. And of course, you also have jobs that produce oil. You know, that's a hard product. So for every oil worker, you know, in an area where there's oil, they may support 7 or 8 jobs right there with the oil they produce. So when we talk about employment, that they're losing hardcore jobs that actually produce things have a greater effect than losing taxi driver jobs right there. So taxi driver jobs kind of come under that non-productive area. You know, a taxi driver can't, you know, I drove so many miles and dropped off so many people and made so much money. But he didn't make anything. He didn't produce anything that can be resold. He's provided a service. You go to a restaurant and they serve you a meal that they're, the cooking and the waitressing, the cashier, they're not actually producing anything. They're processing the food, but the farmer produced the food. You can buy the food at the grocery store and produce it and cook it yourself at home. They're providing a service. A maid that comes to your house doesn't produce anything. It's just that they're. So you get into some of these things, and what I'm looking for in that 1C question, and it's got a lot of marks in it, right there, is your thought process. So that you think about the various things right there. There's no wrong answer on these right there, but I'm looking at, discuss the issues that must be dealt with. road conditions, motorbikes and running red lights. You know, that's a huge one right there. And I run red lights too, you know, on occasion. You know, I hate to admit it. But, you know, auto races at 3 in the morning, you know, you've got a, I want to say FedEx, what's the delivery service? One of the delivery trucks going through it from JB to KL, and all of a sudden people are having races on the North-South Highway. What effect does that have? Because in order to have self-driving cars, you have to make the assumption that the cars on the road are following the laws. And that's an issue. And in the US, they found that most car accidents involving self-driving cars were the result of a human-driven car violating traffic laws. So, all right, question 2 gets into, and I didn't get into this in great detail, but I will probably use parts of this question. But I'm going to leave this whole question in this discussion here. Explain how the position of a standard servo motor, that's the one that I talked about, where I talked about the fact that the angle is set by sending a pulse width modulated signal of a particular width. And I went through that in great detail. The continuous one, I think I kind of skipped over. I didn't really cover that one, but you might want to look that up. It's also covered by pulse width modulation. It's just that a particular width pulse will stop the motor. Anything greater will turn in one direction. Anything less will turn in the other direction. That's it. I didn't do anything with H bridges in this class. I didn't talk about H bridges. And I did talk about open loop versus closed loop control. That there. And again, the exam is scheduled a week from today. I'm giving you these questions. I'm open on Tuesday or Monday of next week to answer any questions that you have on this here. I want you to spend the weekend looking at it first before I'll answer the questions. Okay, so question 2, that there you still have that there, again, when you look at open loop versus closed loop, basically you can give me a whole table of the advantages and disadvantages of each. You can basically show diagrams of open loop, closed loop, and that they're in closed loop, there are different types. I really didn't go into great detail on that. This one is probably, looking at these questions, they're pretty detailed. This is probably not the semester I had my stroke. Because last semester I had the stroke, so I kind of dumbed down the final exam some. And I'm probably going to dumb this one down from the one a year ago simply because I missed a number of classes, so I skipped a few topics. All right. I will probably come back and talk about these sensors again on Monday, but there's 4 basic types of sensors that they're the position, which tells you, which is a sensor that tells the robot exactly what position the arm is or position of it is. A range, how far it is from that there. The idea of a range sensor might be the backup sensor on your car. As you get closer to an obstacle, the beeps get closer, closer, closer. That there. A velocity sensor is how fast something's going, right there. And proximity is how close you are. And I've got a slide that talks about the Hall effect that I'll talk about on Monday. Now, question 3B, which is the last question there, is one that I just put there. It may be completely, this one here, I don't expect anybody, if this was the first time you saw this question, I would not expect a perfect answer. But I would expect you to kind of think about it and just put down an idea how you think you would do it. I'm looking for a first pass. So, assuming you have 2 drive wheels that use standard DC motors, you have a track that's placed on a floor with a narrow stripe, and your car is supposed to follow the track. Right there. So, I will tell you quickly how I would do it. But again, this may not be the question, maybe something completely different. But the whole idea is, what I'm saying in this question is that I've got two drive wheels right here. These are each hooked up to a motor right here, motor. And that there, I will use PWM to control the speed right there. I would probably use some kind of optical sensor to look for, actually probably two sensors to look at for the track right there, to follow the track. So it's a black there, so I can look for a sensor. And there's a type of sensor that looks like this that shines a light there that reflects it back right there. Right there, I would use that type of sensor. Again, I'm going to talk a little bit more about sensors on Monday, inshallah, assuming that I get out of bed on Monday. That's there. And I would turn the cars by varying the pulse width modulation on the two wheels. So you would put that in, that's there. It may be a different question, but that's, again, I wrote this question, so I have an idea how to answer it. That's there. That's a hard question. That's there. And almost on every one of my tests, I always have one question that I almost expect nobody to get the right answer, but I want to see how well you do. And you're used to the UK system, which about half the test is that way, right? Passing is 40%. So if passing is 40%, that means that you could get more than half the questions wrong and still pass the course. That there. So, the American system, 60 is passing. So our tests tend to be easier, but they have higher marks required for passing. And in 2.5 years of teaching here, I have never mastered the art of writing tests that are so hard that I get averages in the 70s. I always end up with averages in the high 70s, or not 70s, or 60s. My averages tend to be in the 80s on my final exam, right there. And that's because I'm shooting for about a low B average at there. So I write tests where I get about an 82, 83 average, which happens to be a very high B, and anything above that, 82, 83, what is it? 85 is an A or something like that. So I tend to have high marks at there. So that's what the midterm is going to look like right there. And I need to get some pink books that's there. And there's that there. Again, this is an example. I'm not posting this. The reason I'm not posting this is because I don't want someone to look at this, that's not here and say, well, that's what it is. I just need to order these questions. And I'm set to go because I'm already warning you that this is an example. This is not the questions. And that's why I'm not posting them on Facebook or giving them to you out there. Now, will one or more of these questions be on the actual midterm and the final exam? Most likely. So knowing the answers to these questions, the essay questions will probably most likely be something slightly different or completely different, because if I tell you this here, you can sit there and write out an essay well ahead of time, memorize it, and answer it. And that's not what I'm trying to assess. I'm trying to get the fact that you're thinking about other issues other than the engineering issues. So here we're talking about, the 8 points that I don't even know if these points add up to 100. But when we look at question 1C, that that is about 10% of a final exam mark right there. Right? 8 marks out of 100. That there, because again, I just got pasted this. That there for a final exam. That I'm really kind of looking for that social, economic, non-technical side of engineering. I know Dr. Kyrell teaches a course in what is it in your freshman year, ethics and engineering or something like that. I didn't get into any of the ethics questions up there, but when you look at as engineers, especially at the upper level, but even at the lower levels, a lot of decisions that we make affect society out there. And if I had a lot more time, I would bring in some of the videos. And when I was a kid, we used to watch movies in school as a grade school or high school even. And sometimes I think that some of these TV shows that I've watched sometimes can explain the topics better than I can. They definitely have a better budget that they're. But there's a TV series in the U.S. called Engineering Disasters, right there. And I find that particular series to be fascinating, and I would love to have time to force you to watch some of the episodes, because it shows what happens when engineers get lazy and get careless, or when corporate greed overrides what the engineers are saying at the grassroots level right there. So I mean, so you get into this whole side of there, and how far can you push your boss on an issue? You say that you don't think it's safe. You don't think it's safe. There's a problem. Well, there's a problem, and they say, let's go ahead and do it anyway because we're behind schedule, and chances are it's going to work perfectly fine. An example of that is, you're probably not as familiar with it as an American student. A number of years ago, and I'm thinking back in the late '80s, it might be, but there was the Challenger, the space shuttle program, Challenger, and one of them exploded on takeoff back in the late '80s. It just blew up. It went up in the air, went about maybe half a mile up, and just exploded right there. And what they discovered the problem is that the oil rings on the fuel tanks, when they're cold, they contract and fuel leaked around them, which created an explosive condition. The engineers were aware of that out there, and they had warned NASA that it was very cold that night before in Florida. The space shuttle, most of the space rockets are shot from down called Cape Kennedy, but it used to be an Air Force base. Now it's a NASA launch site there in southern Florida, not far from Orlando. And Florida is in a warm part of the U.S., but it gets cold. It's not Malaysia. I mean, and that night it happened to get below 0 degrees Celsius. So the engineers had warned, were making the warnings they're making, to the bosses, saying, we may want to reschedule this flight to to a later date where it's warmer at night, where we don't have this problem with the oil rings. So they were fully aware of the dangers of doing that, but for political reasons, they decided to go ahead and do it. It's probably going to be okay. Well, 13 people died, including I think it was a 4th or 6th grade school teacher that was on that there was going along for a space ride. She taught at school. So when engineers don't speak loud enough about warnings out there, if you're building a building and you're a construction engineer and you see that the contractor is pouring the foundation too thin, that they're in the buildings at danger for collapse because it's not structurally sound. You know, if you bark too loud, you know, the production, you know, the company, the contractor that's hiring you as an engineer might just fire you because you're making too much noise and they don't want to have you that there. Well, the flip side is if you don't sound the warning and the building collapses, which has happened in multiple cases, that there, and people die, you know, and you're the engineer that signed off on it, you know, you could be, at least in the U.S. and also in Malaysia and pretty much all in Asia, the engineer that signs off on that can be held legally responsible. Now, the U.S., they're not criminally responsible, but I know Taiwan and China, and I think even Singapore has actually jailed engineers, you know, construction engineers that signed off on construction that they knew was faulty, right there. General Motors signed a car a number of years back called the Pinto, and there was a design flaw in the car, and we hit it from the rear in a certain way. It punctured the gas tank and it exploded. Not there. Again, that was an engineering oversight. These things kill people. So when you look at, you know, the job of an engineer, you know, people's lives are at stake. You're laying out a factory with a robot and you don't put the safety precautions into that robot and something goes wrong and that arm swings around and hits a worker walking by the robot that there and kills that person, who's the one responsible for that death? Not the robot. The robot doesn't have a mind. No, it's the person who designed, and not even the person who designed the robot, the person who installed the robot, set the robot up, programmed it, needs to make sure that there's safety features and these things built into it. So that's the kind of thing I'm looking for in this class. And so I don't teach that in this class, it's not on the syllabus, but it's something I feel very strong that engineers are aware of their social responsibility. And I know Dr. K teaches the class that is supposed to cover that there, but I feel it needs to be mentioned in other classes too. Okay, as I said, I was going to keep it relatively short today because I've got a headache coming after my lack of sleep there, but I will come back on Monday, inshallah, and we will finish up the sensors. And this is it for the robotics. I'm going to move on to industrial automation, where we're going to look at PLCs and those types of discussion items. So, sure. Okay, have a great weekend. I think we're going to Malacca tomorrow for a wedding. I don't know what it is, but there's something about 60 years old that everybody we know, that my wife knows. I don't know anybody in Malaysia. I didn't go to school in Malaysia. I mean, I'm saying I don't know any. I do know people in Malaysia, but I didn't go to school with people, and I don't have long-term close friends. But it seems like everyone in my wife's family and friends has got somebody that's getting married like every other weekend. It seems like it's that typical that there's that you go to weddings almost every Saturday or so, or sometimes 2 Saturdays. I think this Saturday we've got 2 weddings, one in Malacca and the other one in Segamat, on the way back from Malacca. And maybe it's not Segamat, that's farther toward that other town between here and Malacca. Sarabam, yeah. That's there. So we're gonna go tomorrow afternoon after prayers, and we're gonna stay in Malacca and attend the wedding in Malacca, and then attend the next wedding, Sarabam, and then come home. So we got 2 weddings, which means that I will never lose weight. Yeah, so sometimes I got 2 weddings on Saturday and 2 weddings on Sunday. So, but you know, I'm not going to complain. But it seems like caterers need to come up with a different menu. That you know, it's just me, but it's always what the oily rice and the beef rendang, the chicken curry and the dal, eggplant dal, and then the pickle. It's the same that there. So I mean, if you have two weddings, it's going to be the same meal at both of them. And that's the only complaint that I have. Let's vary the menu a little bit there. But I guess that's tradition. I can't fight tradition. Okay, enough with my. That is 40 minutes.